My team and I are excited today to tell you about this new project that we've just begun right before the pandemic hit. Um, so just to set the stage, although probably most people are aware, but what the justification for this work is, the average age of diagnosis of autism in the United States right now is 4 years and 4 months. This might not sound that bad, but the mean age that parents first report concerns to their pediatrician, this comes out of actually several different studies, hones in right around 18 months, so far before the average age of diagnosis. And a couple of studies have found that between a third and half of parents actually first begin feeling concerned, whether they report it to primary care or not, even before the child turns 1. So we could do a much better job of early detection. And in fact, the average age of diagnosis, which is reported in the CDC prevalence reports every other year, hasn't changed at all since they began publishing those reports in 2007. It's always hovered right above age 4 and has not changed. So the entry point usually for early detection is screening, which is done often in primary care. Back in 2007, the American Academy of Pediatrics put out guidelines directing pediatricians that regardless of whether parents had concerns or expressed any concerns to them, every child should be screened in the primary care setting at 18 and 24 months of age using a validated screener. And there are a couple that are available and widely used. One that probably people know, Diana Robbins was here actually just before the pandemic, I think, to tell us more about this measure called the MCHAT, or the Modified Checklist for Autism in Toddlers. It's a simple one-page form, very quick for parents to fill out, takes under 10 minutes. However, one limitation of it is that it doesn't have norms and autism cutoffs until 16 months of age, which actually is still pretty early. But given that a third to a half of parents have concerns earlier, it would be ideal if we really wanted to drive the age of diagnosis earlier if we could screen in the first year of life. Another measure that is often used in primary care is the infant toddler checklist developed by Amy Weatherby's team. And this actually does go down to 6 months, which is really helpful. But one of the limitations of this measure is that it was actually developed as a screener for communication disorders, not for autism. And so it casts a much broader net and picks up many more children than just children with autism, and that's its intention. But a limitation of both of these measures is that they do require parents to make some tough judgments that might require, in some cases, understanding what's developmentally appropriate at different ages, or what they might be expecting their child to do in terms of imitation or pointing or response to names. Sometimes they're not even sure what those concepts actually entail and what demonstrating the behavior really would be like. So they can require some knowledge, I think, that not all parents may have. So in response to these gaps in the field, it motivated us to want to develop our own instrument. And we were very fortunate to get funding from the National Institute of Mental Health and Autism Speaks between 2013 and 2019 to engage in this program of research. The measure that we developed, we call the Video Referenced Infant Rating System for Autism, or the VERSA, and it differs from traditional screeners that, like I've just described, in a couple of important ways. First, and most importantly, it uses videos rather than written descriptions of behavior. So parents see 2 videos of children, and these children are the same age as their child, and they're asked to pick the one that's most like their child. So you can see that in this screenshot here. And that's the second important difference from the existing screeners. It doesn't really require knowledge of what is or is not developmentally appropriate at a certain age. And it doesn't ask parents to make these really tough sort of dichotomous ratings about the presence or absence or adequacy of specific behaviors like pointing or eye contact. The videos in the Versa are rated on a 10-point scale of social competence, and lower scores indicate a lower frequency of social and communication behaviors. So within the pair of videos that the parents see, one shows a child who's more socially competent, and then the other shows a child who displays fewer of those social and communicative behaviors. The way the Versa works is that the choices start out pretty broadly distributed. So they're showing two children who are pretty different in their social communicative competence. But then depending on which video the parent selects, the choices narrow with each successive pairing until a final score is reached several times in a row. And it's sort of like how your optometrist helps you figure out your eyeglasses prescription, in essence. So let me show you how it works. All right, this is a video of exactly how the Versa would display on a computer screen to a parent. And in fact, a parent is taking this as we did the screen capture, and I'll sort of talk over it a little bit. Let's get back up. Okay. So this part on the left, video plays first. She looks like she's trying to get his eye contact by peering at him. She does this all tickle with him, but he remains looking at the object the whole time, doesn't make any eye contact with her, and is just very focused on the toy. And that's paired with this other child who's showing more social behavior. So he looks at his mom, he was doing some pretending with the doll.
What's this? Wow. What's this?
Looks up at his mother again, smiles at her. So he shows more social behaviors, and this mother picks the child who's showing fewer. Now she gets a new pair of videos. This time on the left is the child who is more socially competent. So you can see she's doing all pretending with the phone. She shows her mom something and smiles at her and makes eye contact. And then this is paired with the child, also a female, who does less of this, focused on the object, doing some repetitive rolling of the wheels. She is looking at her mom a little bit, but has sort of a flat facial expression, not as engaged. And so then this parent picks again the child with lower social communication competence. Then they get a new video, all positive. Okay, so that's basically how the Versa works. And you can see the prompt here is very general. It doesn't ask about their eye contact or their facial expressions or anything. It just says which video is more like how your child interacts with you on a typical day. So the first study of how well the Versa worked, we did in a familial high-risk group. In this study design, also called an infant sibling design, we study children who are at higher risk of having autism because they already have an older sibling with it. They're at essentially about a 20% risk for developing autism themselves if they already have a first-degree relative like a sibling with it. And then we compare them to a low-risk group where the infant has older siblings, has to have at least one older sibling who are typically developing. And then we also make sure there's no autism out in the second and third degree relatives as well. So pretty low risk for autism, or essentially general population risk. And so in this initial study, what we found is that the parents of 22 children who developed autism in that study, they're plotted on this red line here in the figure. They rated their child lower on the Versa at every age we gave it, which started at 6 months and went through 24 months. So their scores were lower at all ages, and that difference became statistically significant from the non-ASD groups, the high risk and low risk groups that didn't develop ASD at 9 months, and stayed significant then all the way through 24 months. We also found that the Versa had 100% sensitivity at 18 months. So at that point, about half of the children had been identified as having autism already at 18 months and diagnosed, and the Versa picked all of them up. And it actually picked up 80% of the children who were ultimately going to get diagnosed at 36 months. So it had good predictive validity as well. So, this seemed like a promising instrument. It's low burden on parents because it's all online. They don't need to come in and do anything. It actually only takes about 7 minutes to do, so it's even shorter than filling out those forms with the written descriptions of behavior. It has good predictive validity, as I just described, and also in that initial study, we were able to derive with ROC analyses and ASD risk cutoff score. So we felt that the next step would be to test it on a community sample. But this is actually a really big step because given that the general population prevalence of autism is a lot lower than the prevalence in a familial high risk sample, it's under 2% compared to the 20% in infant SIBS. We knew we were going to have a really large sample, and it was going to be a huge study compared to the one we'd already conducted. So sort of daunting, but we were really lucky because right as we were getting poised to take that next step, NIMH, that is, put out a special RFA focused on novel screening methods for detecting autism in the first year of life. So it was just perfect for us, and we applied for it, and we're extremely fortunate to get funded in this RFA. And in fact, they only funded 5 projects, of which a second one also came from the Mind Institute. So I wanted to give a shout out to Megan Talbot, because she also got one of these 5 grants to study her TEDdy instrument. So very, very cool that the Mind was well represented. The study, which we call the SCREEN study, has been funded since 2019, so we're in year 2 right now, and it has 2 aims. The first one, which is essentially to replicate looking at the psychometric properties of the Versa in a much larger and now fully community-based general population sample. And then a second aim, which I'll only talk about a little bit at the end of today's presentation, which was to develop some machine learning methods for screening that I'll go through briefly. So I have depicted here our screen team. They've been extremely busy during the pandemic and really productive, and we've made good progress. But it is very important for me to say at the outset that what we're going to report on today, our team, is really preliminary because we're only in year 2. The project manager for SCREEN is Chani Parikh. You'll hear from her in a little while. She's a postdoctoral fellow at the Mind Institute and is part of the LEND program right now. Rachel Nee is our project coordinator. She recruits and enrolls many hundreds of children and does intakes with them and is a very, very busy person. You're also going to hear from Greg Young, who does many things on the project, but many are related to data management and analysis. But the whole team contributes. I mean, this, you'll see in a moment, is a huge project, and everybody depicted here plays an important role and does helps with intakes, does MChat, follow-up interviews, is an examiner, etc. So it really has taken a village to get this project underway. You won't hear from all of them, but everyone's playing a big role. So just a quick overview of the study design. We proposed in the grant to see 2,000 children in the study. And here in year 2, we've already enrolled over 1,000. So we're halfway there, which I'm very excited about. The design of the study is that almost all of it occurs online, and we actually set that up very fortuitously for us prior to COVID to be this way. So basically what families do is they go online at these 6 ages and take a number of screeners and some other online surveys and forms. And if all goes well for them and they're not screening positive, their entire involvement in the study through the 3 years is fully online. So therefore, we've been able to be very productive during the pandemic. If anybody screens positive, and there are 3 screeners, I'll show you them in a moment, but if they screen positive on any of the 3 measures at any age, they're first of all immediately offered what we call a clinical monitoring visit, which is just to help them get a diagnosis as early as possible. So no matter what age they are, we will see them if they want and do an evaluation. But regardless of that, they're also seen at 24 and 36 months as part of the study protocol for a comprehensive diagnostic. Another important feature of the study design is that we randomly select between 10 and 15% of children who screen negative on every measure at every single age. So they are at low likelihood of having autism, we think. But looking at the screen negatives allows us to estimate how many children fully fall through the cracks of screeners and don't screen positive on any of these measures, but yet actually do have autism. That's important for a second reason, which is that it then helps our evaluators who see the children at 24 and 36 months be completely blinded to the screen positivity status. They don't know if this is a screen positive or screen negative when they're seeing the child. And these are the instruments that we use, obviously the Versa. We also give the MCHAT-R, and I just want to point out here that we do give it at ages prior to where there are any norms developed, partially because we needed to have a comparison to the Versa. We wanted to be able to compare things like how long it took to do both types of screening or which parents preferred. So we needed that comparison, but we also wanted to see how well the MCHAT operates earlier. We also give the infant toddler checklist, but I have little parentheses around this here because we actually added that to the protocol later. So we have some missing data for it, and we'll have somewhat incomplete reporting of that later in the talk. Then if they screen positive, they come in pre-COVID and they would get the ADOS and Mullen and a bunch of other measures. But then during COVID, we had to substitute the Tele-ASD PEDS, which is a remote assessment for autism, also called the TAP, and then the developmental profile 4th edition, which is a parent interview to screen for developmental delays. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to the next speaker, who is Rachel Nee, and she's going to tell everybody a little bit about the sample.
All right, thank you, Sally. So prior to this current grant, we received a generous donation to conduct a pilot phase where we recruited about 250 participants. And through this, we were able to develop and hone our recruitment methods and build upon those current strategies. And before I begin talking about each of our forms of recruitment, I would like to note that these are all IRB approved methods. And as you can see here, we recruited about half of our sample through Facebook and Instagram. So we worked with UC Davis Health's Public Affairs Department to create several Facebook and Instagram advertisement campaigns about screen. And our ads are shown and targeted at parents who have searched for certain keywords such as baby, pregnancy, or development, and parents who interact or follow different parenting groups as well as baby products, and as well as any families located within Northern California. And we also recruited about a quarter of our sample through the UC Davis Health's billing records. And we contacted families who had babies born within the UC Davis Medical Center within the past 6 months, as well as any child seen for a well child visit within our pediatric primary care network. And in January of this year, after a very long and arduous process, we obtained IRB approval from the California Department of Public Health's Vital Records Office. And we were able to obtain birth records of every single child born within the state of California. And this has been a very exciting opportunity for us, mostly because despite using it for only 2 months, we have recruited 10% of our sample through this. And we do believe it will be a very strong source of recruitment for us in the future. And if anyone here is interested about the process of applying for this, just please feel free to reach out to any of us. And other forms of recruitment that we have used through this for the study is through word of mouth of friends and family members, as well as various community outreach programs of flyers in like pediatric offices or daycare centers, as well as through the Mind Institute. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right, and then as of February 2021, we have 1,034 participants enrolled in our study. And since we were provided with the lovely opportunity to conduct the pilot phase, we did recruit and enroll 254 participants prior to January 2020, which is when we officially started enrollment for Screen. And since then, enrollment has been steadily increasing. And with our continued engagement with families, we have retained 94% of our participants, meaning that they have signed and completed an online session and are actively completing a current online screening at 9, 12, 18, 24, or 36 months. Next slide, please. All right. And then we also have a pretty diverse sample that is very representative of the Sacramento demographics. So we have 54% males and 46% females enrolled in our study. And in the chart on your right, left, breaking down race, about 60% of our sample is white and 40% is non-white. And about a quarter of our sample is Hispanic. And looking at the next chart of about household income, about a third of our sample is making less than $100,000. As then another third between $100,000 to $200,000. And I would also like to note that a majority of our families are residing within Northern California, so about a 100-mile radius of the Mine Institute. But we also have families enrolled from Southern California as well as out of state. And now I'm going to turn it over to Greg Young, and he will be going over the Versa with you.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. And let's see. My video isn't start, but anyway, so we obviously are only in year 2, but we have a fair amount of data already on some of our measures. And there we go. Okay. So obviously, as Sally mentioned, our major goal is to validate the Versa as a screening tool in a community sample. But a big part of measure development, as anyone probably knows who's done it, is we really need to establish and look at the psychometrics of the measure as we develop it. That includes looking at things like reliability and validity. And we've in our prior paper, we did establish that the Versa has pretty good reliability. If we look at test-retest reliability or split half reliability or inter-rater reliability, meaning that the Versa works consistently over time. But we're in a position now to start looking at validity, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the data we have that is helping us to establish what's called criterion validity, which has 2 components. So one of the components is looking at concurrent validity. Looking at concurrent validity, which really establishes how well the Versa works compared to other screening measures. And again, as Sally noted, we're examining 2 other screening measures that are traditionally used in a lot of the literature in early identification, the MCHAT and the ITC. So we're in a position to look at how well the Versa is correlating with those screeners over time as our sample ages between 6 and 24 months. And then the other type of validity we want to look at is predictive validity. So looking at how well the Versa at each age predicts who is going to develop autism in the community sample. So I'll talk about both those types of validity. But first, I just want to show the slide that we're looking at now. Gives us an idea of what the distribution of Versa scores looks like in the data that we've collected so far. If you remember, the parents are choosing videos and it's kind of winnowing down as to what type of child is most like the parent's own child in terms of their social communication behavior. And it yields a score, a final score after all these choices that the parent makes that range from 1 to 10, 1 being the child shows limited social competence, 10 being the child shows a high degree of social competence. So I'm showing this slide just to show that we've got the entire range on the Versa being captured. So the vast majority are obviously scoring very high in the Versa. They're showing social competence, which we would expect in a community sample. But we do have, a fair number on the lower end of the scale where we have possibly some concerns that these children are showing some early signs of social communication problems. Okay, so next slide. So we've got these other screeners that we're using that have been used in the literature, in the ITC and the MCHAT. And I wanted to show this slide just for the data that we have to illustrate a few things. So the first thing is that the ITC and the MCHAT are pretty highly correlated at each age. So each different color is a different age. We've got red for 6 months all the way up to the purple and pink line for the 24 months. So the correlations between the ITC and MCHAT across all ages are pretty high, ranging from like 0.62 to 0.75. So that's a good sign, at least, that both of these early screeners are measuring the same thing. And just to note that the MCHAT is negatively correlated with the ITC because higher scores in the MCHAT indicate higher degrees of social communication deficits, whereas the ITC higher scores indicate more competent social communication functioning. But a second thing I wanted to note about this data that I think is interesting, especially in relation to the Versa, is if you look at the 6-month score, so that's in red, it's the lowest line. When you compare that to the 18 and 24-month-olds, which are the top lines, the blue and purple, one thing is pretty clear that on both instruments, the younger children at 6 months are scoring in the more concerning range, right? They're scoring worse than the 18 and 24-month-olds. And that's interesting in the sense that the ITC and MCHAT both are fixed questionnaires that ask the same questions to all the same parents, regardless of how the child is. And a number of those behaviors are not developmentally appropriate for 6-month-olds. So there's the risk with these types of screeners that when you're asking parents about behaviors that are not developmentally relevant, that it's going to be flagging a lot more children as concerning because they don't show these competent behaviors than would be a scale that's normed by age. And so that's in contrast to the Versa. So if you think back to how the Versa was designed, when parents of a 6-month-old infant are rating their 6-month-old infant, they're actually viewing videos of other 6-month-old infants. Parents of 12-month-old infants are viewing videos of 12-month-old infants. So in a sense, by design, the Versa is normed, is age normed in the way that the ITC and MCHAT are maybe not. One of our hopes is that this will provide a higher degree of sensitivity when screening younger children. And so the next question we can ask is how well the ITC and the Versa are related. I don't have a slide for the correlations, but just to note that if we look at the correlations over time between the Versa and the ITC, there's a gradual increase from almost no correlation at 6 months to fairly modest correlation of 0.44 at 24 months, which could be a sign that the Versa is sensitive to things earlier that the ITC is not, but that they start to converge later when the ITC is maybe more relevant for toddlers. So anyway, this slide, I hope, kind of conveys a similar piece of information. So we're looking at Versa scores on the y-axis and how those change over time in 2 different groups. Now, the group in gray are children that are screening negative on the ITC, so they're not being flagged as having concerns. The group in red is a group of children who are being flagged on the ITC as having concerns. And what we're seeing is that group that's being flagged on the ITC is not really showing any differences on the Versa scores at 6 months, but as they age and move toward 24 months of age, those kids are showing significant differences on the Versa. So the Versa scores are converging on the ITC cutoffs the older the child gets, which may be more evidence for what I was saying, that the ITC is maybe not as sensitive to some of those earlier behaviors that the Versa might be. So that kind of is the story of concurrent validity that we have right now. So the next thing I want to talk about is predictive validity. And this is asking the question of, well, how well does the Versa perform at predicting later autism signs? So we have a couple of measures of later autism signs. And again, remember, we're only in year 2, so the data is just still coming in. But one of the things we can do is look at prediction of SRS scores, which is the social reciprocity scale, which is a measure of social communication behaviors and deficits. We can look at parent ratings on that measure at 24 months and how well the Versa predicts those measures. We can also look at more diagnostic-oriented measures, categorical measures like, does the child meet diagnostic criteria for ASD at 24 months? So I'll talk briefly about prediction of SRS scores. And if we go to the next slide. So this is just a table of a regression model looking at the degree to which the Versa scores at each age predict the later scores on the SRS. So at 6 months, we see there's no prediction, but as early as 9 months, and this reflects our earlier work with the high risk sample, as early as 9 months, the Versa scores as rated by the parents are predicting later scores all the way at 24 months for those children's SRS scores. Now we can look at the other screeners to see how well they're doing. And actually the MCHAT, if we look at the same type of models, the MCHAT is also significantly predicting those SRS scores as early as 9 months. And for the ITC, unfortunately, for those kids who have reached 24 months, we didn't have the ITC in place yet in our protocol, but we do have enough at 18 months to demonstrate that even at 18 months, ITC scores are predicting SRS scores 6 months later. So this is also a pretty good sign that the Versa and these other screeners are pretty useful in predicting later outcomes. So I'm going to turn it over now to Chani to talk about prediction of diagnostic categories.
Thank you, Greg. So after looking at the predictive validity in a dimensional way, we wanted to look at categorical differences between children who did and did not meet DSM-5 ASD criteria at outcome. An important note as I present the next set of results is that in the current sample, we only have 9 children diagnosed with autism. So we first looked at group differences on the Versa, where again, as a reminder, lower Versa scores mean more ASD-like sociability. And what we found was that the ASD group, shown here in red, had lower Versa score at all ages than the non-ASD group. And this became statistically significant starting at 9 months. Next slide. So next we looked at mean group differences on the MCHAT. Now here the ASD group shown in red is at the top of the graph, where higher scores on the MCHAT mean more ASD-like symptomatology. Now, despite the MCHAT not having cutoffs younger than 16 months, we do see that the ASD group has significantly higher scores as early as 9 months compared to the non-ASD group. So overall, these group differences are very consistent with the regression analyses we just presented. So it's promising that whether we use expert examiner diagnosis confirmation or parent report as the endpoint, the screeners are predictive of later outcomes, and this is as early as 9 months. Next slide. So we were also interested in how the Versa is operating in a community sample as compared to the familial high-risk infant sibling sample that we published in 2020. And we found very similar Versa usage metrics in both samples. So both groups of parents, those with ASD experience due to an already older child diagnosed with autism, and those naive to ASD, such as in the current community sample, took on average 7 minutes to complete the Versa. Both groups took 7 to 8 number of trials to reach a final score, and both on average took about a minute to select between video pairs on each trial. Next slide. So next, we wanted to look at the group differences on the Versa scores, again between the ASD and the non-ASD groups across the high risk and the community samples. So what you see at the top of the graph are children who did not meet DSM-5 criteria for ASD at outcome in the community sample and the high-risk samples, as shown in gray and light gray. It's reassuring to see that these non-ASD groups who had very similar recruitment strategies of community enrollment and no familial risk of ASD have almost identical VRSA scores across all ages. The bottom two lines are the children who did meet DSM-5 criteria for ASD. And what we see here is that in both samples, the VRSA distinguished autism, as evidenced by the autism group having lower scores than the non-ASD groups at all ages. And more interestingly, when we compare just the samples with ASD who had contrasting recruitment strategies, where one group was intentionally recruited as having familial risk and experience with ASD, such as in the Young 2020 sample, and another, the current community-based sample, who were recruited as having more likely being naive to ASD presentation. These families who are more naive to ASD presentation are reporting lower scores, lower VRSA scores than the familial ASD risk group. However, as mentioned previously, we currently only have 9 children who are diagnosed with autism. So as more children get enrolled and reach diagnostic age, we will have more information on the VRSA psychometrics. Now, we also did similar comparisons for the ICC and the MCHAT, and we did not see the same pattern, such that the ASD scores in the community sample were lower than the high-risk ASD sample. This may be telling, however, of how the traditional screeners are operating in comparison to the VRSA. So rather than having parents endorse the absence or presence of specific behaviors such as eye contact or response to names, the VRSA is allowing parents to rate on overall sociability of their child based on video examples and not specific behaviors like the current screeners do. And with that, I'll pass it back to Sally.
Muted. Thank you. Great presentations, everybody. So just a little bit more info on the 9 children so far that we've diagnosed. 8 out of the 9 are male, so we have the 1 female here. And one of the children is actually a younger sibling of a child with autism. We don't exclude those children. And in fact, we don't exclude children who might have other risk factors for developing autism, like being premature, et cetera. Because all of those things exist in the general population too. So this child is a younger sibling. One of the things we were really interested in seeing is whether all of these children screened positive and at what ages on our different measures. So we were happy to see that the VRSA picked up all 9 of them. So each of them did at some point, earlier or later, screen positive on the VRSA. And you can see that in fact 6 out of the 9 children screened positive on the VRSA in the first year of life, which is really exciting for us because that was the point of this project, is trying to pick this up early in the first year of life. Now, this wasn't the case that we had 100% sensitivity for the measure on either of our other screeners. So both the MCHAT and the infant toddler checklist missed at least 1 case of a child who had multiple screenings and never screened positive yet had autism. And some of these are pretty telling. It's hard to do a direct head-to-head comparison, but some of these are fairly compelling, I think. Like if we looked at this one, for example, she began screening positive on the VRSA at 6 months of age, yet she screened negative on the MCHAT at 18 months and on the infant toddler checklist at 18 months, and in fact didn't screen positive on either of those until after she was already diagnosed. Now, there are limitations. As noted, we just have a handful of kids so far with autism, and we'll certainly be getting a lot more given that we're only in year 2. We only are using 24-month outcomes at the moment, and many more children will be diagnosed with autism as they get to their 36-month time point. So the false negatives will increase. I reported that there were no false negatives so far on the VRSA, but we expect that there will be some as they get to 36 months, that some children will get identified who haven't screened positive. And we also haven't looked at the false positive rate yet. So a false positive is where the screener says they might have autism, but then they turn out that they don't have it. We haven't even looked at that yet. And the reason why is because we really do need that 36-month data to be able to say for sure that they don't have autism. And that's when we can determine the false positive rates. But all of these are really important to do to really understand the psychometric properties. So what we're reporting today is promising, but really just preliminary. So some preliminary conclusions are, we're excited that the Versa looks like it works the same for both kinds of parents, those who know about autism and those who don't, which is really exciting and will also mean that we don't have to develop separate thresholds for different kinds of populations or families, that the same cutoffs should work for everybody. The Versa format also looks like it might be more sensitive to early signs of autism. Chani reported that the families in the current community sample actually rate their child lower or more autistic-like, those who develop autism, than families who know about autism did for their children with autism. And so we're not sure why that is yet, but maybe one reason is that the video format's just really useful for families being able to sort of quote unquote see things about their child that are different. It also might be useful that we're not forcing them to make this dichotomous judgment, which can be challenging, about does their child do a behavior or not in this very sort of absolute way, yes or no. So some of the future directions we have, one thing we would like to do with this ultimately is make the Versa into a phone-based app where after they do their rating of their child, it would automatically transmit their ASD risk score to their primary care provider. And that provider then could interpret the score and what it means to them and also make a referral if needed for diagnostic evaluation. I mentioned briefly that the second aim of our current grant is to use machine learning. And so let me just tell you a tiny bit about that, because that's another important future direction for us. So for people who aren't aware of exactly what this is, machine learning is an application of artificial intelligence in which computer algorithms learn, quote unquote, learn, and they adjust themselves in the algorithm in response to training data that you input. And then they get more and more accurate as more training data is input, so that ultimately they can generalize to novel data and to novel inputs. So in this case, for us, the training data are actually the Versa videos, which I neglected to tell you there are hundreds of them. So we have many, many videos and estimated over 300,000 minutes of video. And for most of the videos, these are labeled to say, these videos have autism, these videos don't have autism depicted in them. In addition, we had undergraduate coders manually hand tag behaviors that are relevant to autism and when they're occurring in the video. And so we provide this to the machine learning as well. So we tell them, they're making eye contact at this point, and they're vocalizing here, and they're smiling at somebody there, et cetera. So the machine can then learn to pick up the ASD relevant behaviors. And this is our second novel approach to screening that we proposed in the grant. And we're working on this with colleagues in electrical and computer engineering at both UC Davis and a collaborator at the University of Kentucky. Now, another potential application of machine learning is that as the computer learns to make these discriminations, it could actually find common patterns among the ASD videos that discriminate them from the non-ASD videos that are different than the ones the experts focus on, like eye contact or social smiling or responding to name. And so in this way, machine learning could actually be informative to clinical practice by pointing out for clinicians other things that distinguish ASD that maybe like they're just not on our clinical radar yet, or sort of obvious to the clinical eye at the moment. So another future direction we're hoping ultimately for is that parents could upload their own video that they took onto an app, and the app would apply the machine learning algorithms that we've developed to automatically generate an ASD risk score that could again be forwarded to the physician to make some sort of interpretation and determine if a child needed a diagnostic assessment referral. So that's where we're hoping to go with it. And ultimately, the goal of both of the aims is to decrease waiting lists and increase access for people to rapid care, no matter where they live. You know, do they live somewhere near the Mind Institute or a tertiary autism care center where they can get this done there, or do they live somewhere very far away from that, no matter what their income is, any other demographics that might increase disparities to care. So we're hoping that both of these new approaches to screening will eliminate some of those bottlenecks. So first, I want to thank a bunch of people and groups. I want to thank the Delaney family who provided the gift, the very generous gift that got us such great pilot data that we were competitive to get this grant. And then our funders from NIMH, the IDDRC that did a bunch of our assessments for us, Autism Speaks. I want to thank this amazing team. They have been working so hard during the pandemic. This is one of our lab meetings on Zoom. Although from the look of my hair, this was a very early lab meeting, or very early pandemic lab meeting. I also really want to thank Patrick for starting us off with cake, because that made me very happy. And then finally, I wanted to thank the participating families. The families who contributed their video made the Versa what it is. And now we have thousands of families in the general community who aren't even at any known risk for autism, the vast majority of them, and yet contribute so much time to this project. So thank you to them too. That's my final slide.
Thank you very much, Sally, to you and to your team for this presentation about these exciting tools that you guys have developed. Let's see if anybody has any questions. So there's one question here. So given that more than 20% of your sample was Hispanic, I was wondering if they received, all the screeners and other diagnosis tools included in this project in their primary language.
I'm afraid not. Most of the video that is used in the Versa comes from our infant sibling study. That's where we captured that video. And most of the families spoke in English when they were in the sessions because we were assessing them largely with English-speaking examiners. So no, and that in fact will limit the generalizability certainly to in the future unless we're able to revamp it in other languages, which at the moment we don't have plans for, but good question.
So Sally, there is another question that apart from some comments that you can see about your exciting project and everybody likes this wonderful research that you guys are doing. So the question is, machine learning is very powerful to learn about the training set. However, before you make the results translate to practice, it's very important to validate. What is the plan for the validation?
Yes, so we're working with colleagues in engineering who are doing this, and there are two ways that they're approaching this. The first is that they have pulled out a training set and then kept a test set back. And we're already, in fact, I just did a report on this, but we are already doing training and test validation on that. So we have just two entirely separate sets, and there's no overlap between the children whose videos are in the training set and the children whose videos are in the test set at any of the ages. So we're doing that. That's a standard practice in machine learning. And then secondly, we are acquiring new video in the project now with the new children who are participating. So ultimately we'll be able to then, once we've shored up the algorithms and like how they're working, we can then test them on all the brand new videos that we're now acquiring in the 5 years of this grant.
And Sally, did you do any screening for repetitive behaviors?
That's an excellent question. We tried to, and so initially we tried to set up 2 sets of videos, some of which had this continuum of social communication behaviors depicted, and some of which that had a continuum of repetitive behaviors represented. But we really couldn't find very good videos for the repetitive behaviors. They just don't show up that much in the kinds of sessions that we were videotaping. So we didn't feel very comfortable with the video data set for the repetitive behaviors. However, in the first grant, we did study the repetitive behavior video set, and it performed really poorly. So the reliability was low and the validity was low. And so we dropped that. There used to be, in fact, the Versa used to be twice as long because they had to do a whole set of searches for social communication and then a set of searches for repetitive, and that part didn't work. So we were able to, in fact, shorten the Versa, and now it's only half as long and operates actually better than when we had the repetitive behaviors in it. So it seems that the social communication behaviors are, in fact, the most predictive.
And how did you grade the videos for autism symptoms?
Excellent question. So what we did is we took this huge pool of videos, and we had 3 waves of raters look at it who graded them from 1 to 10. So some of them were people who knew a lot about autism. They were other people that worked at the Mind Institute outside of our lab. And in fact, some of you may have done it. We recruited people who worked on Charge and Marbles and others, and they donated their time and actually did the ratings for us, which was really helpful. We also had undergraduate raters do it. And then we also had our own clinicians contribute some of the ratings as well. And then we put those all in a pool, and we got average ratings between 1 and 10 across, I forget how many undergrads did it, but over 100, I think. So we had several hundred raters develop those 1 to 10 continuum ratings.
There is also a comment from a mother, the twins that are participating to your study. And she's thanking you for the accessibility of ASD diagnosis.
Oh, thank you so much.
So the other question from Rebecca Schmidt is, if you are distinguish ASD from other behaviors, so will you be able to train to screen for other behavioral disorders?
Excellent question too. I mean, we hope we will. One of the really nice things about using this general community sample and also having some screeners like the ITC that intentionally pick up a broader range, not just autism, is we will get other outcomes. And in fact, already we do have other outcomes from the children who have reached 24 months. As mentioned, 9 have autism, and off the top of my head, I actually have no idea how many have other delays, but I'm thinking I think we had about 70. I don't know. I think it's maybe 20 or 30. Devin, you might know this from that analysis you just did. But I think we might have 20 or so that have other like communication delays that aren't autism and other things. So ultimately, as we get more of those, we can then see if we're able to, if the Versa is distinguishing them, and we could then potentially also use them in machine learning analyses as well.
Sally Roger made a comment, and she's saying, in addition to having the physician identify children for diagnosis evaluation, that person could also refer children directly to early intervention via public services, where they can receive services for their various needs without needing a formal ASD diagnosis.
Thank you. Excellent comment, and that's a great point. I'll be sure to say that in future presentations as well, but absolutely, yes, to get them into intervention, whether a diagnosis is made or of what. Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Susan Rivera says that you guys did an amazing job, you or your team. And then the question that she's asking is, when parents see a pair of videos, is one always of an ASD child and the other is a neurotypical child?
No, in fact, so they're graded on that continuum of 1 to 10. And so at the very low end, the 1s and 2s, most of those children do have autism, but in the intermediate ranges of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, where they might have less social competence than the kids at the other end, those are not children who are diagnosed with autism. They're children who are just in those 20-second clips showing low rates of eye contact, low rates of vocalizations, low rates of responding to name, pretending, imitating, etc. So no, absolutely not. They're always, the two videos presented are always of two different points on that continuum. And so they start off very different. I think the first two videos that are presented are a 3 and an 8. Maybe it's a 2 and an 8, but then they narrow over time. And so usually they're going to be presented children who are on different points of the continuum, but one of them doesn't actually have autism. They just are showing lower rates of social communication.
Marjorie is asking you, can you tell us more about the guts of the machine black box of the Versa? What set of features are you looking for? How do you make discrimination when you are deciding what show the participants on the next round?
Yeah, let's think if there's a way. I don't know, Greg, do you want to handle that, or you want me to try to muddle through too, which I think I probably can.
I mean, I could try. Yeah, it's kind of like a staircase procedure, if you're familiar with that, where you're trying to make finer and finer distinctions between two exemplars. And the way the Versa works is, so it starts out with a video that's rated as a 3 and a video that's rated as a 8. Sorry, my video. And so if the parent chooses a 3, then the next set of videos move toward that end of the scale. So they see a video that was rated as a 2 and a video that's rated as like a 6. And so the window narrows, but it follows the choice of the parent. So it kind of corrals them into a final score, but it's responding to their choices on the prior trial. So, and typically it takes 7 to 8 trials to really narrow in on a score. So it's sort of like a staircase procedure in that sense.
Yeah, we have one more question from Robin Hansen. Fabulous research. At this point, are you contacting the primary care providers when kids score a risk, recommending that families contact Early Start for possible intervention services?
So currently what we do is every family, as I said, is offered an immediate visit if they want, not waiting till 24 months for a full evaluation. And then whether they want that or not, we do see them all at 24 months. And so then when they're seen, they get a report that has scores in it that they can then, we tell them all about the regional center. Our feedback sessions are very different because these are families who are not familiar with autism yet by and large. And so they don't know anything about Part C services, about early intervention, about regional center. So we provide them with all that information in a both verbal feedback session and in a report, and then talk to them about the next steps in terms of insurance companies going to their primary care and giving them this report and things like that. So yeah, we do all of that.